It is late 2006 and one of the most watched trials in history is coming to an end in the Iraqi capital Baghdad. The defendant is none other than former President Saddam Hussein. Before a special tribunal, he is answering for his part in the massacre of 148 Shiites in the town of Dujail, which he ordered in 1982. The trial has lasted more than a year and Hussein has denied any guilt. On November 5, 2006, the judges hand down their verdict, death by hanging. Hussein's lawyers will immediately appeal, but they will not be able to overturn it. A month later, the former president and unrestrained ruler of Iraq will end up on death row. He led Iraq for 24 years. During that time, he led the country into several devastating wars, and 250,000 people lost their lives in various purges and genocides. Saddam Hussein was born in April 1937 in the village of Orja near the city of Tyrant, north of Baghdad. His childhood was not easy. His father died soon after his birth and he never found his way to his mother. Her second husband beat and humiliated little Saddam, and forced him into the then traditional way of making a living, petty thievery, instead of education. Saddam himself later said that the closest creature to him at the time was their horse. His deliverance came at the age of 10 when his uncle Khadrullah Talfa took him in. At his urging, Saddam completed primary and then secondary school in Baghdad, where they moved together. It was also Talfa, an Arab nationalist who ended up in prison for 5 years after a failed uprising against British rule in the early 40s, who brought Saddam into politics. The young man had gravitated towards radical socialists while still a student, and when he was in his 20s he joined the then banned Socialist Party of Arab Renewal, known by its acronym BAATH. At first, however, it looked like a fiasco rather than a career. In 1959, the 22-year-old Saddam was involved in the assassination of then Prime Minister Abd al-Karim Qassim. The attempt failed and he had to flee to Syria and later to Egypt. He then had to spend the next 9 years largely in exile. However, he did manage to marry his cousin Sajida Taaf. A year later, their first son, Uday, was born. Later they had another son, Quzai, and 3 daughters. But Saddam did not give up his political ambitions. He made friendly contacts with the leaders of the Ba'athist movement and waited for his opportunity. It came in the middle of 1968. After another of Iraq's many coups, Saddam's distant relative Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr gained power in the country. He appointed Hussein, now a member of the party's top leadership, as vice chairman of the newly formed Revolutionary Council and head of the Secret Service. Saddam is 32 years old, and his career is just beginning. As the number 2 man in the ruling regime, Hussein is trying to improve the lives of ordinary Iraqis. In 1972 he nationalized all the oil companies in the country and invested the money in infrastructure, hospitals, and housing. He is also introducing free education and health care, with huge subsidies going to Iraqi farmers. The results will not take long to come. The country is prospering economically and his popularity is growing. Moreover, he is consolidating his position very purposefully. As head of the Secret Service, he sends his party rivals to special prisons called the Palaces of Perdition. Torture is common there, in which he sometimes takes part personally. At the end of the 70s, Saddam Hussein is the most important figure in Iraq. He has only one step to take to gain absolute power, to remove President al-Bakr. This is not too difficult after all. The seriously ill Bakr signs his resignation after a short period of pressure, and a day later Saddam Hussein declares himself the new Iraqi president. He is 42, and the way he wants to lead the country will become clear very soon. 6 days after his election, Saddam Hussein convenes a special meeting of the Ba'ath Party. Exceptionally, he has it filmed, so you are looking at authentic.
طبعا شلون نتصرف ويا الخونة بالنوايا. وانتم تعرفون شنو اجراءنا ويا هيك خونة. لا شيء غير السيف.
During his speech, he makes the fabricated accusation that a prominent party member, Abdul al-Mujahidani, is planning a coup d'etat. Hussein promises him that if he reveals the names of his accomplices, he will save his own life. Apparently terrified, Mujahidani gives the names of his first allies at the lectern. They are then escorted out of the hall by members of the secret police. There is panic inside, no one knows who will be next. Hussein, meanwhile, smokes a cigar with a stony face. Eventually 68 alleged traitors are led out of the hall, a third of them shot by a firing squad. The last is al-Mahadani himself. Saddam Hussein has cast himself in the role of the hero who will bring the Iraqis, and with them all Arabs, to power and glory. He was guided by the motto, trust no one, attack before they attack you, kill to survive. And so in September 1980, a year after his election, he launches a war against neighboring Iran. There, the year before, the strict religious regime of Ayatollah Khomeini had come to power. Hussein feared that the Islamic Revolution would spill over into his territory, and he also wanted his country to become the most powerful state in the region. And also, he wants to seize the vast oil fields in the Khuzestan region of Iran, which borders Iraq. Hussein is convinced he would win the war in a few weeks. But he miscalculates. 100,000 Iraqi soldiers will die in the first 2 years, thousands more will end up in Iranian prison camps. Slowly but surely, anti-war sentiment is growing in the country. Then, in July 1982, the event we have already mentioned occurs. Hussein visits the town of Dujail, about 60 kilometers north of Baghdad, to try to encourage the conscripts. As he leaves, however, his motorcade is attacked by several gunmen. Saddam survives the assassination attempt, but his reaction is furious. He has all 1,500 locals arrested, 148 of whom are executed outright by the soldiers. Most of the rest end up in desert camps. The Iraq-Iran conflict itself will eventually turn into a trench warfare reminiscent of World War I in Europe. But Saddam has one advantage: in the fight against the radical Islamic regime, the Western world is on his side. He will thus be able to repel the Iranian offensive and, at the same time, crack down on the internal enemy, the 8 million Kurds who live in the north of the country and are openly siding with their Iranian allies in the war. Hussein will therefore carry out an operation in which he will level 2,000 villages in which about 180,000 Kurds will die. The chemical attack on the Kurdish town of Halabja is particularly horrific. Here, his planes spray mustard gas on the civilian population. The result is 5,000 dead and 10,000 wounded, most of them women and children. The war would eventually last 8 years, end only in August 1988, become the longest conventional war of the 20th century, and drive both countries almost to bankruptcy. But Saddam Hussein is not about to give up his dream of becoming the most powerful man in the region. Just 2 years later, he will embark on another wartime adventure. Financially ruined, Iraq decides to heel on neighboring Kuwait, which it militarily occupies in August 1990. This will start the Gulf War that he has no chance of winning. The United States and 28 other allies launch Operation Desert Storm in January 1991, and liberate Kuwait after 43 days. At the end of the war there are 140,000 dead, and also the still controversial decision of the Allies not to go all the way to Baghdad and remove Hussein's regime. The whole world will remember this at the beginning of the new millennium. In January 2002, US President George Bush will give a speech to Congress in which he will refer to Iraq, along with North Korea and Iran, as the axis of evil. A year later, a military operation will begin in which the US-led coalition wants to put a definitive end to Hussein. The action has the support of the United Nations, which is based on information that Saddam's regime has dangerous weapons of mass destruction. U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell presents the evidence gathered by U.S. intelligence agencies to the Security Council.
Dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon.
But they don't find any weapons of mass destruction. It's one of the biggest fiascos in American foreign policy to this day. What's more, the troops failed to arrest Hussein himself after capturing the capital. The United States will therefore issue a $25 million reward for information leading to his capture. Yet the search continues for another 8 months. The turning point will come in December 2003. At 8:15 a.m., the U.S. command receives word from its sources that Hussein is to hide on a farm near the town of Dowa, near Tikrit. At 6 p.m. the operation called Red Dawn will start. However, the raid on the 2 selected houses first ends in failure. Half an hour later, however, the soldiers discover a pit covered with soil and bricks. They find Hussein in this so-called spider hole, a 2-meter deep hiding place equipped with ventilation. The former president, masked by a thick beard, offers no resistance to arrest and is taken to a secret location where he undergoes a medical examination and other tests to confirm his identity. Another 6 months later, in June 2004, the Americans hand Saddam Hussein over to the Iraqi interim government. He will appear before a special court in October 2005. He will hear 11 charges of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. After more than a year, the verdict is reached, and on December 26, 2006 the Court of Appeal upholds it. 4 days later, the sentence is carried out. According to the leaked video footage, the execution is accompanied by cursing and insults, followed by joy and dancing. Masked men lead Hussein to the spot at sunrise and put a noose around his neck. Saddam has no time to say the last prayer. The executioner released the trapdoor in the middle of the sentence. The next day, Saddam Hussein will be buried in the family plot in his home village of Orja.